There's an interesting article in Zero Hedge today. It's very short, but it's just talking about how someone noticed that Costco has reduced the size of their paper towels that they sell at the store by, the roll has 20 less sheets on it now, but the price has stayed the same. And obviously, this is an example of price inflation. It now costs more to buy paper towels at Costco because you're getting less paper towels for the same amount of money. However, in the way that these statistics are officially calculated, this probably will not be counted as inflation in official Fed metrics. Normally, a decline in quality or bang for your buck is overlooked by the Federal Reserve when they're calculating inflation. And the reason for this is quite obvious. The Fed has a bias towards wanting to understate inflation because it gives them more power. The Fed is limited in what it can do and how much it can manipulate the economy by the rate of inflation. If inflation gets too high, well, then the Fed has to stop printing money because they're screwing too much with the economy, and the bond market will lose confidence in the Fed. And that's why over the years, the official inflation metrics have been revised and reformed in ways that show inflation to be as low as possible. For example, there is this concept called hedonic adjustments that the Fed makes to the prices of goods. And they look at it this way. If a product is getting better, you're getting a better value for your money. And so therefore, even if, let's say, a car going from a 2020 model year to a 2021 model year, there's some improvement made. And the Fed says, oh, this car is objectively better, but the price has stayed the same. And so in reality, the price has gone down. This is an example of deflation. They do this all the time. That's why, for years, as cars have in fact been getting much, much more expensive, and cars are ridiculously unaffordable, even used cars. The Fed, in many cases, makes the case that cars are getting cheaper because there's all this technology in there. Because, oh, look, you have Bluetooth now and you have a GPS. It's like, well, why do I care if there's a GPS in my car? I have it on my phone, and it works much better. All I need my car to do is to go forward when I put it in drive. And yet now cars are costing, maybe 50% more than they did a decade ago? That would be an average of what, like a 5% rise per year, annualized? I remember back in 2009, my dad went out and bought a brand new truck for under $20,000. Nowadays, you would be very lucky if you could go out and buy a brand new truck for $30,000. Reminds me of comparing the price of an old 1970 Trans Am to that of a 1978 or 77 Trans Am like was used in Smokey and the Bandit. Objectively, the 1970 Trans Am is a much better car, though I won't get into that. But I believe the price went from somewhere in the neighborhood of like $3,500 to $4,000 to, by 1978, about $7,500. So it's a similar sort of increase like we've seen here, yet officially the Fed has reported inflation to be much, much lower over this past decade than the decade of the 1970s. And the reason for that is because of the way that they calculate these inflation metrics. Back in the 70s, when the price of a Trans Am doubled over 8 to 10 years, the Fed counted that as inflation, because obviously that's inflation. But nowadays, the Fed does not do that. And likewise, I doubt that when the quality of goods keeps getting cheaper and cheaper, when paper towels get thinner and thinner, when the number of sheets on a roll gets less and less, the Fed is not taking that into account and counting that as inflation. Even if they did, though, the so-called core inflation metrics, core CPI and core PCE that the Fed likes to wave around, and what the Fed really uses, their gold standard is core PCE. These metrics typically don't include things like fuel, food, or housing, which, kind of are the core resources that people need to live, the core components of the cost of living in America are not included in the core consumer price inflation metrics. But the things that they do include in these inflation metrics are cheap plastic toys from China, actually, legitimately deflating tech goods, which, it's the only thing that the prices have gone down on in the last 20 years. And of course, hedonically adjusted automobiles that, have gone up, rose in price to absurd levels. Many cars and trucks you can go out and buy for over $100,000 now. A car should not cost $100,000, or at least not, a common car. Maybe a very high-end, European supercar or something might get you up in the six-figure range. But a Ford should not cost you the price of a starter home, or at least the price of what a starter home should be. And I don't really have a good segue, but I also want to talk about a really blackpilling moment that I had on Twitter this morning when I saw a guy, I don't know, I assume he was some Republican politician, getting ratioed because he was talking about how having these ridiculously high unemployment benefits are pricing are essentially, have hollowed out low-wage work in America to a point where, most notably fast food and restaurants can't find any workers, but also lots of other businesses. I mean, everyone I know who's hiring these days can't find anybody, can't get them to show up to an interview. Small businesses, of course, places like Amazon and these other folks, they have no problem covering the costs. They have the resources. They can do whatever they need to get things done. If necessary, they can just automate themselves more and get rid of low-wage work. But, for smaller businesses that don't have these massive, robotic warehouses and assembly lines, that's not so simple. And so the result is that less goods are being produced in America because, more people have money. That's keeping them out of the labor force. And less goods are being produced, so we have more consumption, less production. All that means, even if you don't see it in prices, this is what you need to understand about inflation. Inflation it's just when your money is buying you less things. Even if the price doesn't change, even if you don't see it, things are getting cheaper. There's more filler in your hamburger. The bun is bigger. The burger, is smaller. There's less paper towels on the roll. The cars are made with more plastic and less steel. And so these imbalances are manifesting in our economy in a variety of ways. The Keynesian idea of just looking at inflation as price increases is, it's very low IQ. It's one-dimensional thinking. Inflation is so much more than that. And what I'm afraid of is that the Fed will just continue to manipulate the inflation numbers so that officially inflation doesn't get up to a point to where it really would affect the bond market. And the bond market just decides to, ignorantly accept the official inflation statistics, even though you have sites like Shadow Stats that calculate what inflation would be using the Fed's older metrics, like the 1980 version of CPI or the 1990 version of CPI. Calculating it the old way, it shows that inflation right now is over 10%, which, hey, that's pretty reasonable when you look at everything that's going up ridiculously in this economy, and you average it all out, you think, 10%, that sounds about right. But obviously the Fed could never publish that, because then interest rates would probably go on the 10-year. Interest rates might go up to 11-12%. And that would bankrupt the United States of America overnight. It would be over. And so inflation in this country needs to become even worse than it is now. It needs to become so extreme that the Fed can no longer hide it and pretend it doesn't exist. And once everyone knows that there is inflation, once they expect it to continue, the bond market will begin to wake up. But right now, for some reason, they're still buying Powell's bluff about this all being transitory, which it is not, because there's no... The reason for this inflation is all these high unemployment benefits. It's not deference. I can't remember the term. It's when they're deferring the payments for people on their mortgages and their rent, so that they don't have to pay for their, for their housing costs right now. The term is escaping me. But that is giving people a lot more money to just go out and spend on stuff without producing any more. And then you've got these trillions and trillions in corporate welfare handouts that are being, handed out by both the Trump and the Biden administrations. These massive, transfers of money on paper are what saved our economy on paper. Without this massive increase in government spending, there would have been a massive drop-off in the GDP. All they did was, by the government just printing up a bunch of money and transferring it to a variety of corporations and some to individual people, that, again, on paper, made our economy look much bigger. But the reason why it's only on paper is because spending money doesn't mean anything if there's no production tied to it, if there's no meaningful wealth generation tied to that transfer of money. It is not a transfer of wealth necessarily. All it is sort of money is just a claim to wealth. So if you just produce more money and you don't produce any more wealth, the country has not gotten any richer. And so all of this inflation has to continue, or else we would have a massive, that massive economic drop-off on paper, although we've already had it in real life. We can see that. You can see that the economy is in bad shape right now. You can't go out and buy things. Things cost more. Things are out of stock. Businesses are closed because they cannot produce enough resources to satisfy the demand of all these people walking around with their green pieces of paper. And your money is only worth, it's not worth the paper it's printed on. It's worth whatever you can trade that money away for. The paper it's printed on is worthless to you. To the extent that you can't exchange your money for goods and services, money is meaningless. And so I think I can safely say that I see no end in sight here for this. Now, if I'm wrong, which again, that'd be nice, because we're not going down a good path here. I would like, it will be very interesting to assess how we got out of this situation. But I mean, the possibilities at this point are the Fed and the government stops printing money and stops, all of this artificial stimulus, and they let the economy crash. And we start to rebuild our economy from a healthier position, or they just continue printing and stimulating, and prices will rise more and more, and the inflation will continue as long as this policy is in place. This is an inflationary policy that is being carried out by the Federal Reserve and the federal government. There is going to come a breaking point where the market finally realizes that Powell is serious and that he is going to let inflation run hot forever. And therefore, they will begin to demand higher interest rates. That's it. Now, I think that the bond market is dumb for not believing Powell now. Powell is making it abundantly clear what's going on, and it should be clear that inflation will not be transitory. Either they believe one of those two things, that either Powell will act to rein in inflation the way Paul Volcker did back in 1981 and 1980, which I can assure you Powell will never do, or they believe his lie that inflation is transitory. There's no reason for inflation to be transitory when it is a direct result of a policy that Jerome Powell and Joe Biden are determined to pursue in perpetuity. That's the bottom line, and we should know by the end of this year if this is sort of the big moment, because it looks like we're going to have a long, hot inflationary summer. But with that said, I think I will leave things off there.